We next have the discussion on the subject of the prisoners of war in the aftermath of the most recent conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I give the floor to the rapporteur, the author, Andrzej Kovac, for 1.5 minutes.
Commissioner, Minister, dear colleagues, the main aim of this urgency is to strongly demand an immediate and unconditional release of all Armenian prisoners, military and civilians, detained during the and after the most recent war from last year between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Baku has to refrain from any arbitrary detentions in the future and to fully implement the tripartite ceasefire statement, which foresee an exchange of prisoners of war, hostages and all other detainees, as well as remains of fatalities. Despite the various definitions Azerbaijan uses for these people, calling them criminals or terrorists, they are all protected by the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law and should be returned to their families. Azerbaijan should assist the European Court of Human Rights by providing with reliable information on the detainees and their well-being. It should refrain from any mistreatments of or humiliation of these people. Independent and effective investigations has to be carried out for all credible allegations of grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions and other violations of international law and war crimes. Baku should also close down the so-called trophy park, which exhibits degrading and dehumanizing wax figures of Armenian soldiers, which further intensify long-lasting hostilities and undermine the trust between the two countries. I would like to remind that the European Parliament has always tried to be as objective as possible. If we had reliable information that there are currently any Azerbaijani citizens in Armenian custody, we will be demanding the same things from Yerevan: immediately and unconditionally release. Every human life is precious and has to be preserved. Very soon, this House will discuss the country reports of Armenia and Azerbaijan. We are going to evaluate in our demand from today and if it have been fulfilled, and then accordingly the text of the future reports will be adopted. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie pośle.
Thank you, sir. I now give the floor to the author of the resolution, Santos, for 1.5 minutes.
O conflito entre a Arménia e o Azerbaijão transformou a relação entre
The conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan has marked the relationship of these countries for decades and affected the populations of both countries. The conflict last year led to 5,000 soldiers dying in barely 44 days, and many people who were forced to flee from their cities. A number were taken as prisoners of war, and that is the focus of our resolution today. There was an agreement to have an exchange of prisoners of war, hostages and other detained persons, as well as recovering the mortal remains. It is unacceptable that today there are still Armenian prisoners in Azerbaijan, and we are hearing reports of torture and degrading treatment. This is a clear violation of the Geneva Convention. We call for the unconditional release of all prisoners and for the agreement to be fully applied. Both sides must abandon their hostile rhetoric and come back to the negotiating table, working together with the Minsk group. A negotiated political solution that recognizes fundamental rights is the only way to have a peaceful and sustainable future in the region.
Next, I give the floor to the author of the resolution, Astrovicius, for 1.5 minutes.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues, regrettably, conflicts and war in the South Caucasus are leading the way against dialogue, cooperation and peace. The most recent autumn war between Armenia and Azerbaijan is a tragedy resulting into grave suffering for both nations. Everything possible must be done to move from conflict to peaceful coexistence. Release of prisoners of war, hostages and other detainees is a way forward. No matter how many prisoners of war remain, human life is sacred. International commitments to the safety, health and dignity of prisoners must be upheld. One of the consequences of the conflict is deployment of so-called Russian peacekeepers to Nagorno-Karabakh, which raises another equally worrisome security concerns. Russia's presence might turn into a long-term process. The European Union was a passive observer of the conflict and did not use its influence to prevent it. The European Union must initiate and actively participate in the peace process and help its highly valued Eastern partners, Armenia and Azerbaijan, to meet the needs of their people, which include confidence building, cooperation and a lasting peace. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you. I now give the floor to author of the resolution, Van Kamon Taubadel. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, dear colleagues. War is ugly and unjust. Thousands of killed soldiers from Armenia and Azerbaijan and many more displaced civilians. That is the price of what President Aliyev calls an unprecedented victory. Mr. President Aliyev, nothing suits a true winner more than humility to extend a helping hand to its defeated enemy. Not only because it is morally correct, but also it is strategically wise. True winners know that dehumanizing the enemy in trophy parks and crossing the border only extend the vicious circles of violence. True winners know that indoctrinating your children with hate only maintains war, and that short-sighted revenge will never lead into solid peace. And they also know that unjust done to displaced Azeris can never justify similar unjust against Armenians. So true winners know that every human life counts, no matter of which ethnicity. President Aliyev, there was once a long-standing friendship between Armenians and Azeris. So you have a chance now to be a true winner. Embrace your defeated enemy and turn them into loyal friends again. Because if Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijani, and it is, you are responsible for all the well-being of all of its inhabitants. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję, pani poseł.
Thank you very much. Next, I give the floor to the author of the resolution, Barena Arza. 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. The attack against Nagorno-Karabakh by the Azeri government ended upon an agreement between the parties that has not been respected by Azerbaijan. Around 200 Armenians are still held in captivity by Azerbaijan, and these prisoners of war are being mistreated by the Azeri military, and there are allegations that prisoners have been subjected to extrajudicial killings or enforced disappearance that constitute war crimes. It's time for this Parliament to demand to Azerbaijan the immediate and unconditional release of all Armenian prisoners detained during and after the conflict, full implementation of the ceasefire agreement, and to refrain of further military intrusion in Armenian territory. As the joint motion for a resolution states, a long-standing political negotiated solution based on the principles of non-use of force, territorial integrity, and the equal rights and self-determination of peoples is crucial to determine the future status of Artsakh. A comprehensive political solution will be needed, but meanwhile we have to expose the Turkish Azeri aggression against Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. We're still talking about Azerbaijan, Armenia. Next, Weimers for 1 minute speaking time.
Thank you, Madam President. OSCE Acting Chair and Sweden's Foreign Minister Ann Linde called for, and I quote, the sides to urgently complete exchange of detainees, end quote. Sides? How many Azerbaijani prisoners of war does Armenia have yet to return? Dear Minister Linde, there is only one side in this conflict that completely disregards international humanitarian law, and that is Azerbaijan. Ann Linde, as a foreign minister and acting OSCE chair, I ask you as co-author of this resolution of the European Parliament to heed this resolution and call upon Azerbaijan to immediately and unconditionally release all Armenian prisoners, both military and civilian, detained during and after the conflict. Diplomacy is no excuse to conceal the truth. Thank you.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie pośle, w imieniu Grupy Europejskiej.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the EPP, next, Van de Kendelara has the floor for 1 minute. President, colleagues, the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh has been dragging on for far too long and is a major concern for the European Union, particularly with respect to the repatriation of the prisoners of war. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty about the fate of the prisoners of war and the failed way that the Azeri authorities have acted. Let us be clear. The Van de Kendelara has the floor for 1 minute. President, colleagues, the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh has been dragging on for far too long and is a major concern for the European Union, particularly with respect to the repatriation of the prisoners of war. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty about the fate of the prisoners of war and the failed way that the Azeri authorities have acted. Let us be clear.
Let's not wait for Aliyev to return the prisoners. He won't do it unless he is forced to do so. I call upon you to save the dignity of Europe. I call upon you to stand by the Armenian people and to call for the Armenians to be returned to their families. We are all Armenians.
Castaldo.
Now Mr. Castaldo, who's arrived. 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente, gentile Commissario.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, well, on the 8th of November in Baku, there was a major national celebration commemorating the aggressive war in Nagorno-Karabakh. There's a very strange slogan that was chanted about Karabakh being part of Azerbaijan. Now, we have the situation with Armenian soldiers taken as prisoners of war and they are not being returned. There are many disproportionate measures being taken by the Azerbaijanis. This sounds like a nightmare, but it is a reality. So we must condemn in absolute terms the exhibition that the Azerbaijan has set up on war trophies. This is one of the darkest moments of Europe history, and we call for the immediate release of prisoners of war, which should not be used as hostages for blackmail. They must immediately close this museum of war trophies, which I think cannot be called a museum, and I called upon the European Parliament to act solidly.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Now for the Commission. Commissioner Dalli has the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, members of the European Parliament, for raising the issue of prisoners of war and other detainees in the aftermath of the 2020 hostilities. We took good note of the letter of more than 120 members of this House on the same issue. The EU has taken a clear position. We have repeatedly called on both parties to fully implement the ceasefire agreement. We have also called on them to exchange prisoners of war and to release all remaining detainees, regardless of the circumstances of their capture, in accordance with international humanitarian law and the ceasefire agreement. The release of all Armenian detainees is essential for building confidence and trust and would be an important political gesture. We welcomed the release of 5 Armenian detainees on the 29th of January and of 3 on the 4th of May. We insist that all remaining detainees be released without further delay. The EU expects both parties to cooperate not only on the return of detainees, but also on other important humanitarian issues. The recovery and repatriation of remains of the missing should continue. Urgent and decisive steps are needed on the exchange of information necessary for the conduct of humanitarian and demining, including de-sharing of any available maps of minefields to enable return to areas devastated by conflict. To diffuse tensions and allow societies to progress towards normalisation, it is also crucially important to refrain from inflammatory public rhetoric. The EU has called for accountability for any violation of international humanitarian law. Allegations of torture, ill treatment or execution of captives and any other war crimes that might have been committed during the recent hostilities must be thoroughly investigated. The EU stands ready to contribute to international and independent justice mechanisms and to support an independent investigation into such claims. The cessation of hostilities and addressing the range of immediate humanitarian issues is only a first step to end the long-lasting Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Renewed efforts for a negotiated, comprehensive and sustainable settlement are needed. The EU fully supports the OSCE Minsk group led by its co-chairs, and we stand ready to contribute in the shaping of a durable and comprehensive settlement, including through support for stabilisation and confidence-building measures. I thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. That brings to an end this debate. The vote will be held today. The next debate on the agenda is the situation in Haiti. First of all, I'd like to give the floor to the authors. First of all, Mr. Kelly, for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. There is a crisis in Haiti at the moment, a political, humanitarian, security crisis. There was to be a general election in 2019. It hasn't happened yet. President Moise is still in office, in spite of the fact that his mandate ended in February. The people of Haiti are worried, as is the international community, concerning a referendum that is to be run in Haiti during the summer. For the last couple of months, thousands of people in Haiti have been protesting against this referendum and about the president's mandate. Violence is often being used against them. Since there is no transparency or democracy in this referendum, the European Union has made the right decision not to provide funding and not to send observers. The country has other massive problems, the coronavirus, criminal gangs, kidnapping, and even child slavery. I am imploring the authorities of Haiti to take the necessary steps to deal with these very serious problems. Thank you, President.
Next.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Haider for 1.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam President, Madam Commissioner. Haiti at the moment is not just in one crisis, they're in several crises at the same time which are interlinked and which fan the flames of each other. After the earthquake in January 2020, the country still hasn't recovered. On the contrary, it is slipping, pushed by the very worrying political developments towards an existential crisis. And if that weren't enough, for more than a year now, we've had the COVID pandemic, which is strafing the already suffering country. Human rights are on the agenda here. Food insecurity has almost doubled over the last year. Around 4 million of the overall 11 million Haitians are suffering from hunger. Then you have a political crisis on top of that with a corrupt political elite